welcome back. You remember that video series we did a little while ago, the Art-Criticism Dialectical, which I'm still really proud of. If you haven't checked it out, go do it now, episodes 7 through 9. Well, here's something you probably didn't know about it. That pretty complex mini-series was originally going to be one very simple episode that was just me gushing about Horizon Forbidden West and all the things that I liked about it. Maybe comparing it to Elden Ring to highlight some cool things that Forbidden West did that Elden Ring didn't. Now, I've already told you guys how excited I was to play the game, and when I finally did, I played it all in one shot, 120 hours, no other games, and when I finished, I was still like, wow, that was an awesome game. But for me, I have to let things sit in my brain for a little bit before I can really form a take on them. And the experience was so fresh in my brain that I didn't really have time to do that before other things came along, which for me was Elden Ring and then some other stuff that I was late to the party on, like Hollow Knight, Prototype, and Devil May Cry. But anyhow, no sooner had I finished Horizon and started Elden Ring than the FromSoft fanbase, as they do, bore down upon me with toxic takes, review bombing, and insults. Horizon sucks. Horizon is everything that sucks about open world games. Elden Ring is a real gamer's game. If Elden Ring isn't your favorite game right now, you suck at games and are stupid because you simply can't understand it. That last one sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. These are things that get said. And you know what? Like someone locked in the basement, deprived of the things they enjoy and subject to the whims of their captor, I actually started to believe them. I really did. I started to look at Horizon as this mediocre game, a fly-by-night title that paled in comparison to the majesty of Elden Ring, doomed to live forever in the shadow of the superior experience. I'm gonna say something that's gonna lose some of you, but I'm gonna be honest on my channel. Shortly before I originally wrote this episode, I was playing through Fair Missoula, and it was legitimately the most miserable experience I've had playing a game since the original Nier. It was. I was so bored and exhausted. Really, I was burned out on this game by the time I got to the Fire Giant, and honestly, I didn't care about finishing it. But I did, because there's only one language the FromSoft fanbase understands, and if I want to do videos on those games, which I intend to, I need to get footage of beating them all first. So I'm sitting there pushing through it, giving myself a literal headache, and eventually I was like, you know what? I want to have fun for a change. I need a palate cleanser. So I re-downloaded Forbidden West, and I did a New Game Plus on Ultra Hard, and I remembered something. I fucking love this game. I love both of these games. How the hell did I let gamers convince me that I didn't? You know, in middle school and high school, I was pretty impervious to peer pressure, so the fact that gamers were able to convince me through sheer vitriol and shame that this is somehow better than this is unbelievable to me. I mean, even now, assuming that anybody actually sees this video, I would be shocked not to see a comment below it that says, you're objectively wrong. Like, do you guys know what the word objective means? Because if you don't, I have a great video on it, episode 6. Go check it out. Of course, some of you prefer Elden Ring to Horizon, and that's completely fine. If there's one thing we're very big on this channel, it's the validity of personal opinion. So the purpose of this video isn't some kind of counter shit on people who thought Elden Ring was superior and weren't complete dicks about it. The purpose of this video is just to say, if you liked Forbidden West better, you are valid and legitimate in that, regardless of what you see on the internet. It's a phenomenal game. You're not less of a gamer for enjoying it. You don't have a lower IQ, and for those people who didn't prefer Forbidden West in 2022, here's some reasons why we did. Everybody's going to bed and sleep and we'll hear up all night. Instead, games and movies are our sweet reveries. We present 3 a.m. Soliloquies. Everybody's going to bed and sleep and we'll hear up all night. Instead, games and movies are our sweet reveries. We present 3 a.m. Soliloquies. Alright, we did it. I actually want to be here. No. So, let's get 2 things out of the way right now. 1, if your issue with Horizon is that it's too woke, it's too diverse, too many gay people, Aloy is too muscular, she has too much hair, any of those, then your take is not legitimate. Sorry. I'm not going to go on and on about this because it's really a topic for a whole other video, but if you're the type of person who's bothered by that kind of representation, then this channel really isn't for you. Let's move on. 2. Let's address what we've already said about the game on this channel. Now, as we know, Horizon is an example of the dreaded everything game, but it's also an example of how something can be an everything game and still have its own unique personality and identity and quirks and things that it brings to the table that makes it so it's not identical to all the other everything games out there. So, without further ado, here's 7 reasons why Forbidden West rocks. 1, and I'm going to start with the most obvious and important one, the battles. Every one of them, every single one, from the smallest, most basic scouts to the biggest, most menacing combat machines, and everything in between. Every battle is crazy and kinetic and rapid fire and multitasking and so much fun. Aside from the fact that this is an action RPG and you do need to fight in order to level up, even on my New Game Plus where it didn't matter because my level was maxed out, I was still seeking out random enemies to fight because Horizon's combat doesn't feel like any other game. It's mostly shooting, but none of your weapons are typical guns. There's no stamina bar, which usually serves the purpose of making the player be more mindful, but you can only dodge a certain number of times consecutively, and the melee is slow and deliberate, so you'd better be mindful about how you use them. And until you get good overrides to summon some decent machines to your side, it's just you. In the bigger brouhahas, you can easily draw the attention of like 8 machines at once, and they all want you dead. Between the newer Doom games and the more recent Evil West, which I also loved, I realized that personally I love this kind of crazy, sometimes messy action. To give a shout out to something I did like in Elden Ring, I thought Rykard was probably the best boss in the game, and part of that was because of how many things you needed to keep track of at once. 2. Individual creature design. Now, understand that I'm not saying Horizon has superior aesthetic creature design. One thing we can all agree on is that FromSoft is terrific at enemy design and variety. Enemy placement in FromSoft games makes you wonder, how'd this thing come to be here? Why does it have the powers it has? And it's fun to let your brain run away with nebulous stories, and that's part of the mystique and wonder of the Soulsian experience. But even with all that, most enemies aren't meant to be set pieces and will only take 10 or 20 seconds to deal with, maybe a minute at most. Horizon, on the other hand, made the how and why for the machines an actual integral plot point, one that's solved in the first game, but nevertheless it's still a cool experience to look at machines, the way they're designed, their idle activities out in the world, and observe why they are what they are. Possibly even cooler the second time around now that you know about their role in the game's lore. It's such a fun world to let your imagination play in and think about. Now, here's what I mean by individual creature design. Every battle with a machine above a certain size immediately turns into both a set-piece battle and a puzzle. If there's one thing I miss about the 2000s era of gaming, it's that bosses were often puzzles to figure out, and just slapping away at them wasn't enough to beat them, which is something FromSoft really falters at. The vast majority of enemies and even bosses will be vulnerable to the same strategy, which is dodge, maybe block, smack them around, wait for stamina to replenish, and repeat. Horizon conversely asks, hey, what if every big encounter was like a boss, and presents you with all these imposing machines that you could just haphazardly swing away at, if you felt like every battle taken forever? Nah. Horizon asks, and on higher difficulties basically demands, that you think through it all. Plan out traps and tripwires and stealth, and when things get hot, you've got to be smart with your special abilities, aim at weak spots, exploit elemental weaknesses, take advantage of canisters to inflict machines with status effects, turn them into ticking time bombs, detach certain parts of their bodies in a certain order to disable certain powers. Every fight is just as frantic mentally as it is physically, and because there's such an emphasis on learning each machine and targeting parts, your battle experience actually ends up being almost akin to Monster Hunter. 3. It's like Monster Hunter. You guys know this. I love Monster Hunter, and Forbidden West took many of its cues from Capcom's action RPG series. You level up to gain more health and learn new skills, yeah, but your actual offensive and defensive stats are almost entirely dependent on equipment, which you can buy or forge, and then level up using a combination of currency, materials gathered out in the world, and specific machine parts, which must be carefully and deliberately removed from the machine during combat. The progression system in the game is lifted directly from Monster Hunter, and that's not a bad thing at all. On the contrary, it's an additional layer of thought and care that goes into the battle, because now you aren't just thinking about taking out a machine, you're thinking about how am I going to get that part from it? What time of day will I find the specific thing I need to fight? If you're a Monster Hunter fan, I genuinely recommend giving this game a try. The first game, the progression is a lot simpler, i.e. not like Monster Hunter, so I'd maybe recommend watching a plot synopsis video or a cutscene montage or something like that. Which is not to say that the first game is bad, but, the sequel's gameplay is a massive improvement. The story, though, debatable, but that's for another video. 4. The new progression is just one aspect of a combat system that's been drastically overhauled and rebalanced. Most people will agree that this game is a lot harder than the first one, but the reasons for that come from meaningful structural changes to the gameplay. And so this one is kind of a toss-up, because not every fan likes these changes, but I thought they made the challenge more focused and interesting. Let's talk about why. In Zero Dawn, weapons existed on rarity tiers where for each tier there was only one, very rarely two, weapons of each type. So once you got the weapon of the highest rarity of each type, you'd obtained the objectively best weapons, and between all of them, you've got access to all the ammo types, so there's no need to even consider using anything else. In Forbidden West, the weapons got a massive revamp. They're still on tiers, but this time there's tons of weapons of each rarity, and their effectiveness is balanced out by the fact that there's like twice as many ammo types this time, and to have a loadout incorporating all of them at the highest level is actually pretty challenging and requires some careful planning. Not to mention, some of the resource requirements for high-level ammo are ridiculous, so sometimes it might just be better to opt for a lower-level weapon. This means that getting a new weapon doesn't immediately make your old ones obsolete, especially since the Monster Hunter-esque system of weapon improvement becomes pretty important to engage with on higher difficulty levels, and so managing your weapon collection is far more interesting in this game. Moving on to combat. In Zero Dawn, there were a lot of ways to exploit the game. Elemental build-up exploits, skill-based exploits like knocking 3 arrows at once over and over, overclocking your handling stat on a weapon so you could turn a bow into a machine gun, or even upgrading your satchels to the highest level, which made running out of resources for your favorite weapons incredibly unlikely, so you could just spam your heaviest hitters. These are just a few examples, but what it all added up to is that once you got all the best stuff, you just dog-walked every enemy. To bring up Doom again, Forbidden West made a change to its formula very similar to the change Doom Eternal made from Doom 2016. In 2016, if you spend just a little time to level up your favorite weapons, it becomes completely unnecessary to use anything else. I used the Super Shotgun, Gauss Cannon, Chain Gun, and Rocket Launcher almost exclusively. Then Eternal came along and said, fuck that. Your enemies are going to be stronger, there's going to be more of them, and they're all going to have specific weaknesses and weapons that they don't like, and you'll have a very limited ammo clip for each weapon that forces you to diversify weapon choice. I already made a whole video where I talked about that game, so go check that one out, but Forbidden West does something very similar. You can only carry a relatively small amount of resources with you at a time, and the rest goes to your stash, which you can only access outside of battle. This means that every battle you go into, you've only got so much available ammunition for each weapon. So for longer battles against tougher foes, you've got to diversify what you throw at them, rather than just spamming your favorite stuff. Not to mention, they're way more resistant to elements they aren't weak against than the first game, so good luck trying to brute force your go-to elemental strat. Finally, a big change, the dodge roll. Unlike a lot of RPGs like this, you don't have the option of blocking in Horizon, which means you need to master the art of iframes. And if you're a fan of Monster Hunter, or Kingdom Hearts, or Souls, or Bayonetta, or a similar game, that's going to feel very familiar to you, but there's an added wrinkle here. Aloy's dodge is severely nerfed in Forbidden West. In the first game, after some skill upgrades, she can basically fly she rolls so far, and there's no limit to it. But with the second one, I guess Guerrilla was like, that feels too easy, so let's make it so that you can only dodge 4 times in a row before you stumble and become easy pickings. And guess what? It used to be only 3 times in a row. but I guess they realized that was so strict that it genuinely was getting people killed in situations where they couldn't do anything about it. So they raised it to 4, which isn't so strict that it's cruel, but it's strict enough that if you're panic rolling, as Souls players say, it will get you killed. As someone who played this game at launch on the highest difficulty available at the time, I can attest that the 3-roll limit was a big deal, and it's very good that they toned it down. I like all the other combat changes, but that was one that was definitely not great. But all in all, aside from that one thing, Guerrilla did a great job at doing what I call focusing the gameplay, trimming the fat, i.e. the easily exploitable mechanics, to make for a more challenging yet interesting experience that still feels fair once you get used to it. 5. The game took the lessons from 2017 in every way imaginable. Yeah, Horizon uses the much maligned question marks on its map, but I excuse them here because you genuinely don't know what you're gonna get. As we know, Guerrilla lost Game of the Year with the first Horizon in 2017 to Zelda, and they took that loss to heart because the lessons of Breath of the Wild are really reflected here. In some obvious ways, like the addition of climbing Bear Rock or the glider, but also in some ways that you don't see until you start playing. Like when you get the item that lets you detonate some walls with goodies behind them, or when you build the gadget that lets you breathe underwater, which opens up a whole new world, no reference intended, of sights and exploration and even gameplay, since you can't defend yourself underwater, so the game turns into a stealth assignment.
Poseidon's down here.
And that's without getting into Horizon's complete eschewing of your typical open world's proclivity to repeat content, like towers that let you see the world or boring, straightforward, aesthetically identical dungeons. Horizon substitutes open world towers with tall necks, each one of which has a completely different puzzle surrounding how exactly to get on top of them. And the game's cauldrons, which is where you go to learn how to override new machines, are essentially dungeons, and they're all so different in terms of the puzzles you solve, the traversal involved, the mechanisms you have to figure out. No two things in this game are the same. Then there's the story dungeons that present their own genuine puzzle-solving challenges, one of which was legitimately tricky and took a Hail Mary for me to figure out. Or even the smaller ruins all over the game that yield up these fun collectibles that give more cool interactions about the new humans and the way they view the old world. Everything on the map was just a treat to see and do for the first time. Now, comparing that aspect of the game to Elden Ring, we can all agree that Elden Ring's world structurally is more interesting than Horizon's. Secret passages everywhere, incredible mesmerizing and often haunting sights and sounds, all playing off the arcane mythology of the lands between and intricately put together in this way that we've come to expect FromSoft to do. Where it falters for me is just in the fact that it's all the same. Aside from riding Torrent, nothing changes. You go somewhere, you fight whatever's there, you find a passageway to the next place, and that's it. And that's cool, but for me, it wasn't enough to sustain interest. It's cool going new places and seeing new things, but what about what there is to do once you've arrived? You smack a monster around for a few seconds, and that's it. Elden Ring may have the more interesting world to explore, but Horizon has the more fun world to experience, in my opinion. 6, and again, this is all my totally subjective opinion, Forbidden West has a better soundtrack. Like, way better. If you've been here before, you already know, but if you're a newcomer to my channel, welcome. Understand that video game music matters literally as much as the game to me. Sometimes more. Gravity Rush 2. That said, my one and only gripe with the original Horizon was that the soundtrack just wasn't very good. It was mostly just typical sci-fi thriller type sounds, the ambient exploration music, and then the main theme. That was it. But hot damn, Forbidden West took it to a whole new level. They wrote many gorgeous melodies for exploration, for different villages, for the regular battles, and in the true spirit of Monster Hunter, certain machines now have their very own battle themes, and holy shit, some of them are good. I guess I wasn't the only one who had this gripe, because there's no way they would have gone this hard to fix the issue unless it was a community-wide problem. And since the only time most game soundtracks get any appreciation is at the Game Awards, and Forbidden West really didn't get a lot of shine, it just kind of serves to underscore the fact that for most people, best soundtrack means most elaborately orchestrated, rather than most interesting or most creative or best written. Don't get me wrong, Ragnarok was amazing. It was one of the most visceral emotional experiences I've ever had playing a game. But Horizon blended acoustic and electronic sounds in some really intricate and subtle ways that you'd have to actually listen into the music to appreciate. And in doing so, did one of the best things a soundtrack can do for a game. It complemented not just the gameplay, but also the themes of the story. But let's continue. 7. It was fresh and fun the whole time. Recall our conversation about everything games and how FromSoft's refusal to make an everything game was one of the things that made the Souls games unique. But there's a reason that these new everything games are like 100 hours, and then the more focused gameplay experiences weren't and still aren't. And if you couldn't tell by my Fair Missoula story, my god was I sick of Elden Ring's gameplay loop by the end. I've played all of the Souls games, and many Souls-likes, and they're generally a length appropriate for their structuring, pacing, and difficulty. But Elden Ring went on way too long. By the time I beat Rykard, I was honestly ready to be done, but no! I still had Morgoth, the Fire Giant, Malekith, the Snowfield, Melania, Godfrey, Mog. It just wouldn't stop, and I was burnt out from doing the same thing over and over. Now, I know what your counter argument's gonna be. Switch weapons, switch playstyles, respec. For what? So I can grind for more runes by running back through the same areas I've traversed 1,000 times already to level up the new weapons to a point where I can use them at the current level, thus spending even more time playing the game I'm burned out on? Every new thing, every new machine, new dungeon, new ammo type, new weapon, it was all a treat in Forbidden West. It never felt stale or old. It still doesn't after 2 full playthroughs. I never felt burned out playing it, and it just makes an open world feel not just expansive and beautiful, but cool and interesting. And it's a shame that a lot of gamers are not going to give this one a chance just because someone told them not to. So to conclude, for all of you out there that do like the game and somebody told you not to, that's bullshit, and recognize that it's bullshit. You like what you want to like and you play what you want to play. And for me personally, I was tired of Elden Ring after hour 80. It was a slog. Meanwhile, I'm on hour 260 something in Forbidden West, and it still feels just as fun as it did before, maybe even more so. Now I realize we didn't talk about any of the negative aspects of the game. We got into a few of them with the Dialectical miniseries. Maybe I'll make a separate video about the issues with the story another time, I don't know. But regardless, that wasn't really the point of this video anyway. We do so much analysis and complaining online. Sometimes it's nice to just talk about something that you really enjoyed. I like liking things. See you next time.